Right. Today we are going to talk a little bit further into this subject. Right. Just look at this. The trend. What is the world's trend towards the fisheries? Right. Here, I hope you all can see the red color is the trend for the total global fish production. The blue line is the capture fisheries production, and the purple color one is the aquaculture or the culture fisheries. So solid line is the actual data, and these dotted lines are the projections. What could be the future? Actually, this has been done a little bit earlier, about few years back. The trajectory for the future until 2030. So what you can get from this trajectory, as you can see, the world fisheries is increasing sharp. There's sharp increase in the world fisheries, and there's a projected to be increase in the future as well. But you see the capture fisheries, what's happening with the capture fisheries? There had been some increase over the time, but there had been some drops as well as, but we see there's a declining phase. We see a declining phase, or at least the capture fisheries will be some sort of a level of, or it will go down. This is the prediction for the future, right? So what could happen then? I mean, we can imagine what would happen, because the human populations increase very sharply and people need food, especially the protein, to feed this ever increasing population. So how are we going to feed these people in the future? So that is going to be a huge issue, that you can see from this graph, like just like what happening with Sri Lanka now. The government's plan to have organic farming, which is commendable if you can transit from the chemical to organic farming. But how we can do, what is the methodology, and we have to struggle very much to feed the people because of the lot of other issues. So it's not going to be some easy task to go with organic farming at this stage, but gradually, of course, you can. But similarly, you can see the capture fishery is also going down, or at least it will be stable. It's never going to increase any further, right? What is increasing here, you can see the aquaculture. Now, the global culture fishery is increasing sharply, and it's going to overtake somewhere in 2030s, maybe within another 10 years time, the capture fishery will be taken over by this culture fisheries. So that is the future. And this is another another prediction rather. So seafood may be gone by 2048. How come? So imagine now, if you are to continue the present level of exploitation, right? The present level of catching fish, if we are going to continue the same rate, so this is going to be the future. By 2048, there won't be any fish left on the ocean. Can you believe this? How can you believe this? There is no any fish left in the ocean. You might not even think of that, and no one would think of that. But that's how the predictions are. But we as a country, we are trying to increase the fish production, and we have a lot of management plan to increase the production, but this is the situation. So that's why we have to prepare, right? Within another 20 years time, that we won't have any fish left in the ocean. And this is actually the one of the publication in the one of the top articles published, right, based on the global data as well as the predictions. This is how it's going to be in the future, right? So that's where the whole world is now talking about the critical state that our capture fisheries is undergoing, right? There's even some movies you can download, or you can watch in the perhaps in the YouTube as well, The End of the Line. So which talk about is a documentary actually. Let's talk about the how would be the world's fisheries in the future, right? So these are the things, I mean, we as science graduates, which we have, you might have some involvement in the future in this kind of thing. I mean, some of you will be in the working in the fisheries sectors, or at least export industries, or maybe some statistical, even you're out, I mean, not doing the zoology, but outside you will be involved in this kind of a thing. So we have huge issues in front of us, especially in terms of the food security. So that's where we have to look into, right? And these are the predictions again, as with the previous one. You see, by 2012, the situation in the world fisheries is like 51% is the wild capture, whereas the farm fish 49%, almost half. I think definitely now it is already past the 50-50, because this blue line or the farm fish proportion is increasing, and then this one either, right, it will be reduced as a percentage in the future. And this is the prediction. The right side, you have the prediction for the 2030, where, as I mentioned before, the capture fisheries will be taken by the culture fisheries. So this could be the future. I mean, although we are talking about the capture fisheries, but the future of the capture fisheries is going to be a huge issue, right? That's something to keep in mind. This is the global situation, but this won't be very different in Sri Lanka, right? So that's, we have to keep in mind. And whereas the world future will be actually aquaculture rather than the capture fisheries in the future. As you can see, the increase in the aquaculture production over the time. And this is the purple is the fish production for the human consumption. The black line is the catch for fish meal. That's like some of the fish that we are caught, again going to feed the culture fish. That is some sort of unusual thing, right? We catch fish from the sea, and a considerable proportion is going back to the fish as a meal, right? Anyway, that's how things work, right? So that is this situation, right? And all this just to give you an idea how things there is a question. Is there a specific reason for the aquaculture trend? A good question. Actually, it is not that the trend that we want, but that is that it has forced us to go for that trend. It is not like the people really want to do that, but they have forced us to do, because there is no enough fish in the ocean for us to catch, right? And then that's where we have to look for the culture. This is very this is very true about the many countries, right? And then later on we will realize that what are the problems actually in the world fisheries. That's where we have to go with even for Sri Lanka. Now this is the problem, you know, this, I mean, I don't want to talk about this, not political thing, but we are going to have a serious issue with the food shortage in a country like us, especially we are an island nation. And then, you know, this kind of a pandemic situation, we won't be able to get anything from the outside sometimes. And then one way it is very good that we have our own agricultural system just to at least feed the people. But if in some case, if we had to stop imports, what will happen? So that's why we have to prepare for. But similarly, even for the aquaculture, you see our the inland water bodies, they are underutilized, you know, they are not really, other than for the like a basic agricultural thing, but there is no much production from the inland water bodies. And consider the rivers, the lagoons and estuaries, in particular the lagoons, the production is very low from the lagoons. And because of that, we have to very much rely on the sea, but that is also going to be a problem for the future. So we have to face huge challenges in the future unless we plan something now. That's where we have to think a lot, especially you, the younger generation. When you come to our age, these are the problems that you have to face, right? So that's where you have to think of now, what should have to do, what to be done in the future, right? At least you have to have that mindset today to talk about this, right? All right. I hope got the answer to that question as well, which is good, at least that you are engaged in with this lecture. I thought you can raise anytime any question. I'll try to answer as I can, right? So now, if you go back, like you see the fisheries in the early time, like this in 1950s and earlier times, they were underexploited. There was some room for increase. Now later on, now it's fully exploited later on and overexploited. And you see now, most of the fisheries in the now, it's all even gone beyond the overexploited. Now some of the fisheries are crashed or collapsed. There are some large fisheries in the world is totally collapsed suddenly because of these issues. I'll come to these things later on. I'm just still giving some idea about what is happening with the fisheries in the world as well as in the Sri Lankan context. And later we will discuss these things, right? So the problem with Sri Lanka, as I said, there is no much production from the inland water bodies and lagoons as well as, and there we don't have much land in the coastal zone to have a aquaculture as well. So where do we have the lands? The lands available, it's not even enough for the people for their dwelling or for their making their houses or the other factories, so for that also. But if you are going to take these spaces for the culture practices, that's going to be another huge issue together with other environmental issues, you know that. And then the other option is to go for mariculture. I mean, if the ocean is not producing enough fish for us to eat, then we have to go for mariculture practices. Like here, it's not from Sri Lanka, but other countries where they have very lucrative or very successful mariculture practices in some countries. But how about Sri Lanka? Right here, you see all these from other countries. They have very good culture practices for some fish and some mussels. And you can see here the mussel culture in in the ropes or lines. You don't have to provide anything. You just have this substrate and then put some small mussels there, and then they will grow by themselves, right? And then that's how, and even the now the other one is the prawn culture, and this is our mariculture. This is one example from Trincomalee. It's one of the private sector companies called Ocean Peak, right? So they are conducting this mariculture practice in off Trincomalee Bay, and that is actually for sea bass. I hope you have heard about this fish called the sea bass. Asian sea bass, latest calcarifus. So some times we call this as a moda or moda. Very highly priced fish in the world market as well. In Sri Lanka, actually, it's not a very common among some normal people, but it's like in the tourism industry, and then they're very famous sea bass, and it's also a well-known culture species as well, right? So, but there is no much. Just one company came out with this idea, and there's small-scale people doing these culture practices, but it's not really a big part of our production. But you can search in the web like Ocean Peak. Even like this time you can buy, even online you can buy this sea bass from this company, right? I'm not doing a commercial here, but I just mentioned about. All right. Now, what are the issues we have? Or what are the problems we have? Can we increase wild capture? There is no way actually. Well, there is some, especially our coastal fisheries, like one-day fisheries or in the fisheries in the shallow waters. Of course, there is no any room. We have overexploited resources in our coastal zone. The one-day fisheries is done, and then we can't increase any further, or we have gone to the maximum at least. But there is some room to increase in the offshore fisheries or deep sea fishing, or what we call the multi-day fishing. We will talk about this thing later on. We will realize what it is. And then the other one is we have to look for the aquaculture, in particular the mariculture practices, if we can, right? But you know, this aquaculture as well as mariculture, in particular the mariculture, is going to be a very costly. To get 1 kilo of maricultured or cultured fish is going to be a big investment, as well as all the structures going to be big investments, which is not sure it's going to be economically viable, especially for a country like us with all these lot of biodiversity aspects as well. So we have to consider these things, right? And together with the environmental issues, you know, that just like the problem with sheep, but if these mariculture practices start in the large scale, then there will be a lot of conflict with the capture fishermen, because in the mariculture practices they will utilize some of the spaces as well as some of the natural food of fish, and then they might think that is affecting their catch as well. Anyway, the wild capture fisheries is going down, so always blaming the fishermen, always blaming the others, because the low production is because of the other people, that's why they're all blaming the ship or at least the hoteliers, or they are blaming anybody, whoever they can blame. But that is not the real case actually. Even last week I mentioned, the part of the issue is the anyway the over exploitation, and there's a lot of problem with the fishermen as well. So we will discuss later on, right? But the easiest thing is to them to blame the others for reducing fish production, but there are many other causes as well, right? All right. Now there are many other factors as well, right? If I don't know whether you can at once understand this kind of infographics, but you can read it later on as well. Like here is mentioned like the energy, how much energy is utilized for the different form of animal protein sources, like hunting and gathering. Like it just consider the value, right? Whatever the measurement is, hunting and gathering is just the energy utilization is 0.2, and the corn production is 0.2, right? And like if you are growing uh, them from the eggs, this much. But we take this side for the animal protein, the coastal fishing, it's 1.0, right? And if you like grass-fed beef, it's about 3.5, between 2.3.5 and 4. If the beef production is from the other food sources other than the grass, it's going to be the energy cost. And look at the top. If you have to continue with the offshore fishing, the energy requirement is 20 times the coastal fisheries, right? I mean, this energy is energy wise is going to be a huge cost, right? So what is the problem here then? For example, consider that if there is a fuel increase, you see how much is affecting the offshore fishing, right? It's a huge cost for the offshore fishing, fuel cost, and it's energetically it's not going to be effective, right? So this is a huge issue as well, which even I don't think fisheries department might have think of these things, this kind of issues that going to be happen in the future. They would never predict on these things, right? If the fuel price is going to be a very high, the offshore fishing going to be huge challenge. Actually, there won't be any offshore fishing, which means we are going to have another huge issues in the future unless you invented a new form of energy for the offshore fishing. It's not going to viable. What I want to tell you is that even though offshore fishing in the future going to be really a challenge, or sometimes even might have to stop, and that will really going to cause another huge impact on the protein requirement, right? While the things are like that, you can look at these graphs here, the world animal protein sources. What is happening with the different sources of animal protein? Like the blue line here is the mutton line, right? The mutton production in the world. It's almost stagnant for almost half a century or beyond. It's almost same production, you see. It has not increased, which means though the population has increased, the mutton production is remained the same. Right? So which means the people is eating less mutton, and poultry, of course, you see it has increased, and even the beef, you can see there was some increase, but it's also going down. And pork, there is increase. And look at this wild fish, of course, as I mentioned before, it has increased and now going down. and farm fish is the only among the few things that increasing. Right? Now, there is a lot of what you call the controversies here. You see the lot of people now turning into fish as their protein source, because now know that the fish are very healthy to eat. Then now a lot of people avoiding red meat, which means that the demand for the fish going to be increased in several folds in the future, but at the same time the fish production is going down, and this is going to be a huge issue that we need to think of that in the future, right? Because especially for the developing countries, like developed nations, they have other so many protein sources, but for countries like us in Sri Lanka, actually 65% of the animal protein come from fish, as I mentioned last week. Right? It's a huge amount, huge proportion compared to many other countries. Like the world's average is somewhere 18%, the fish contribution to the animal protein, but in Sri Lanka it's 65%. So because people eat less meat and more fish, right? And other than that, the fisheries, as I mentioned last week, also they contribute a lot on the livelihood of people, and for people's health and the nutrition. It's very important, and it's very important economic, and especially for the coastal communities, and for some foreign earning as well, right? And also there is a lot of concern about the environment as well, right? It's not a positive point, but a negative point, but right. How important this fishery is for developing countries, including Sri Lanka, right? You see, the fish are the most or the heavily traded food commodity in the world. So among the agricultural commodities, among the agricultural things, the fish are the heavily traded industry in the world. There's huge money, huge market for the fish in the global scale, right? And look at here, developing countries provide 77% of the global fish production, right? Read it again, right? Developing countries, not the developed country, developing countries provide 77% global fish production. Now what happened, the developing countries, they catch a lot of fish, but they have to export it to the other countries, especially to the developed countries to earn big money. But the people in that country, like in our countries, we are starving, we have a lot of issues with getting protein. But while we have that problem, but still we have to export the fish to the developed nations, right? So that's why we talk about something in the supply demand relationships from south to north, right? It's moving from south to north because most of the countries in the south actually exporting their production to the north, especially to the developed nations, right? So that is the situation, like right. And the other issues with the fisheries is that especially in the developing countries, the fish production is very much come from the small scale fisheries, right? The small scale fisheries always is done by poor people. Actually, they're not technically sound, right? It's very labor intensive. A lot of people involved in the fishing, but for a small amount of catch. I'll show you some of the statistics. You see, the small scale fishing, they are very much the fishing activities restricted to the coastal zone. I mean, they are doing fishing in the shallow waters, and small scale fishes count for 96% of the world fishes. right? Fishermen, among the fishermen, 96% of the number of fishermen actually from the developing countries or the small scale fishermen. But together, the 96% actually catch 58% of the global catch. You see, another 4% of the fishermen, that's the fishermen from the developed nations or the commercial fishermen, just 4%, and they catch the remaining 42% of the catch, right? Almost little bit half, little bit over, right? So that is situation.
Capture fisheries support the livelihoods of over 120 million people. Small-scale fisheries produce 2/3 of all catches, destined for direct human consumption, and provide 90% of the employment in the sector.
Small-scale fisheries provide directly or indirectly livelihoods to a large number of people, including in terms of employment, in terms of income, in terms of food security.
It is important that small-scale fisheries are sustainable and effective for the fishers, fish workers, and the fishing communities.
Important challenges that small-scale fishing communities are facing include declining fish stocks, competition from other sectors which are more powerful, and the overall marginalization of small-scale fisheries.
These guidelines are the global consensus on principles, on best practices, and on guidance to ensure that our small-scale fisheries are sustainable.
They look beyond fisheries, they look out of the box because they also address issues like gender, social development, employment, decent work, disaster risk, climate change, issues which do have an impact on the daily life of small-scale fishing communities.
So government, ministries, policies, they need now to start working on the implementation of the guidelines.
The figures we currently have about small-scale fisheries are based on estimates.
So it is important that policies seek to improve the availability of data and information.
Sustainable Development Goals include a specific target in relation to access of small-scale or artisanal fishers to resources and markets. So the implementation of these small-scale fisheries guidelines are really one way to achieve these objectives.
I can see we're making progress. We need to keep the momentum. That is important.
I hope you got some idea from that video as well. I mean, this is something you need to talk a bit about deeply, right? Of course, you as undergraduate might not have this much of a thorough or deep understanding on this actually, but what I'm saying is like in the authorities, the fisheries authorities in Sri Lanka, I mean, they are also it's not really doing good in this management perspective, which we will talk about these things later on, right? And this is another comparison of large scale versus small scale fisheries. You can see number of fishermen, you can understand just from like a numbers, right? The large scale fishermen, large scale fisheries, how many people involved and how many people in the small scale fishery. And right, the marine fish code for human consumption, like how many of them are going to human consumption, pretty much same, but you see the capital cost for the fishing vessels, how many dollars? It's millions of dollars for the investment for the fishing vessels compared to the small scale, and how many fish caught by these vessels compared to the small scale fishermen, right? And the fuel use, and how much fish is produced for the fuel, and then how many people in all, right? Likewise, you see, in general terms or in the summary, very few people in the large scale fish production, few people in all, but they get the largest catch and largest profit, largest amount of money compared to the small scale fishermen, right? So that's the right. Like I think even the last year I asked this question, why the difference between small scale and large scale, or sometimes I have the question, what do you recommend for Sri Lanka? Is it the large scale fishing or the small scale fishing? Like, so when you're answering the questions, you have to provide this kind of, like, you don't have to by heart these figures, but you can get some insight. But most of the cases, you don't really get the ideas from this kind of things when you are answering, right? So keep in mind as well. Right. What is the global trend? You just will look at what is the trend in the world. You see who is producing the most capture fisheries in the world. You see China in the top. Like you know, for the comparison, we don't have very recent statistics sometimes. So these are the available data I can got, but we'll try to update this later on. You see in the China alone, the production, right? These are the 17 major countries, right? They are together produce 71% of the world share is produced by these 17 countries, right? And then we don't even think of where Sri Lanka stand in this list, right? We'll be in the bottom, right? And if you look at the Sri Lankan situation, so where are we exporting our production, right? We are exporting our production to these countries. I will come to this thing later on, right? That's a lot of statistics actually. As I mentioned before, the countries in somewhere in the lower latitude or the close to the equator, like Sri Lanka and a lot of some African countries, and some countries in the East Asia as well as Pacific, they are pretty much all small island developed nation, right? You see this, the color, most reliant on fish and most vulnerable to microbes, right? As I mentioned before, these are the poor countries. They are the one who's producing most of the capture fisheries, but these are the countries where they have these nutritional problems as well, right? But unfortunately, these countries have to sell their fish to the north to earn dollars, unfortunately, right? There are a lot of other statistics as well relevant to these things where you can later on go through these things, right?
For millennia, fish have been one of the main dietary sources of humanity. As an abundant resource, they have secured the lives and livelihoods of coastal communities for generations. However, this heritage is now under threat. Human activities are increasingly disturbing the delicate marine ecosystems, reducing the fishing stocks. Overfishing is one of the main reasons for the observed changes.
É unha actividade que poden matar. Non tanto que estea ela a morrer de por sí, pero sí que se pode cargar a actividade da pesca.
The numbers are alarming. Although the fishing methods are more efficient than ever before, the fish catches over the last 50 years have continued to drop. Most of the fish stocks are now overfished, and on a global scale. But this drama is unfolding in secret. The consequences of our actions are visible when forests are cut down. The effects of our daily decisions, responsible for a shrinking rainforest, can be captured and documented by satellites. But the decades of overexploitation of the fish stocks have taken place under the ocean's surface, invisible to the eye. Scientists have shown repeatedly that the looming disaster is real, and without controls, the fish stock decline would be even more rapid.
You are creating or promoting an impact in the ecosystem. In a very short period of time, you will lose fish population, social structure, and economic activity will end. That's clear.
So, to make fishing sustainable requires the cooperation of all concerned, from fishermen to sellers to consumers and many others. This is their story. Primitivo has been a fisherman in Galicia for over 25 years. For generations, fishing dominated life in this part of Spain. His father and grandfather lived from fishing. Fishing is often the only industry here, and people depend on it. Everyday life is determined by fishing and what happens out at sea. And today, times for fishermen are not only difficult, they are changing.
A miña máxima preocupación é que o sector se involucre máis na xestión dos recursos. Creo que sin eso, unha pode ser unha actividade que tende a morrer e outra pois pode deixar de ser o suministro alimentario da humanidade.
The Spanish fishing village of Muros on the Costa da Morte is representative of many others in Europe. In the early morning hours, the small fishing boat Maria Rosa leaves the port of Muros. On board, Primitivo with 2 helpers. Previously, Primitivo focused on hake and tuna. Over generations, they were the main source of income. But today, these stocks are at risk. So the amount of fish allowed to be caught needs to be strictly regulated by quotas. They determine, on a yearly basis, how much fish can be caught in each region.
Meu pai collía máis peixe que min, pero tamén o pescaba de outro xeito. Agora temos que competir o que comentaba antes, con flotas internacionales. Daquela, pois, o mercado era máis local, co que traían a diario, pois, xa daba para poder subsistir.
Today, Primitivo catches octopus instead of fish. This is because the quotas for octopus are not as limiting as that for many fish species. But he knows that soon even octopus will be endangered. This is because many other local fishermen also have the same idea, to catch octopus. This rapidly reduces the stock to dangerous levels.
Nos últimos 20 anos eu vexo que o recurso está mermando, sobre todo o recurso máis local, máis sedentario, que non ten migracións tan grandes.
That video going to be a little bit lengthy. I will have it in your LMS. What I'm actually trying to do is like just to give a very a deep understanding about what's the world's fisheries today, and then we go to the lectures actually. Then then we will understand more on this subject. Other than we could have started a little bit of biology, and towards the end we could have talked about the management. But here I'm trying to give the the problem actually with the fisheries. And since most of you are in now third year or second year, some of you can understand then actually much better the subject in the future, right? So okay, here you can see the world's some collapsed, the fisheries collapse, particularly the Atlantic cod, some salmons, Pacific sardine, haddock, right? Luckily, none of the species are actually in our markets. Right? Most of these fish are living in the temperate countries, but well, one thing is most of the statistics available on these species, then our stocks, we don't know actually much about our fish stocks, whether they are actually collapsing or not. But you see this, for example, the Atlantic cod is one of their main catch in particular the Canada, the Canadian cod actually. That's their main catch, but the government has to ban catching that fish because of the total collapse in the fishery. Likewise, some of the fisheries in the world are now collapsing. Like this could happen to our yellowfin tuna or the Kelawalla. Some of like a big eye tuna is already collapsed, but yellowfin tuna has a lot of risk. In particular, the sharks. A lot of sharks are now endangered. We're going to have some collapse in these industries, right? So, what are the problems that we have with the world fisheries, right? And what caused the problems in the world fisheries? The first thing is the overfishing. We are catching too many fish, right? You might have not gone to some of the big markets in like in the Beruwala or even Nigambu or PETA sometimes, or not the PETA now, the Pelagic fish market. If you have ever been to this, you will see how many fish are caught daily, right? Every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, we're catching fish, right? But we are not doing anything for them to grow. We are not supporting anyway, and then we're just catching them, and that results in the overfishing, right? So we are catching too many fish compared to the number of fish are born and they have become mature, right? So there's no way of maturing, they're replacing them, right? And the second thing is the highly efficient technology. There's a lot of fish detection devices, right? Like you can see some like fishing vessels and gear, very efficient fishing gear and vessels as well, and they can go for long months of fishing, and they have radar and sonar where they can detect fish, and a lot of electronic navigation system making things very easy to find a location where fish will be, right? Even some large scale fishing vessels, they use even helicopters to detect fish, right? It's such technologically advanced fishing some countries is applying, right? And then even satellite data, sometimes some countries use the satellite data to predict where today where you can have more fish, and they are available in the internet as well, right? Now the other issue is the bycatch. Bycatch is the catching unwanted or non-target species, very common again, like the turtles catching in the trawl nets or the fish nets, right? Now we will, this recent the turtle dying cases, right? Even today, I think you had joined this, there was a webinar on this issue, right? So we are not quite sure whether the turtles are dying really because of the ship or maybe some other reasons. One of the main cause of turtle dying is actually the trawl nets. They are caught in the net and they have no chance to breathe, and they just die, right? Some there have been some records of dying 10, 15, 20 turtles in one net, right? They might have thrown away, and then we don't know, perhaps that some of the turtles coming into the beaches may be coming from the trawl nets as well. I'm not sure, I don't know, but that's also one possibility, right? And the other thing is the overcapacity of the fishing gear and vessels. There are too many vessels in Sri Lanka as well as all over the world. For the limited available resource, there are too many boats and too many people involved in, right? And that causing a lot of issues, right? And with these, there are a lot of other issues that fishery is facing. We will talk this one later on, something called the fishing down the food web, which means I'll come to that one in the next slide. Fishing down food web and the habitat destruction topic, right? Something like, you know, one thing we don't understand, or people not trying to understand, is that fish is wildlife. That many people forget about this one. Right? They think that fish are just for us to catch them, but they are wildlife. They are very important component in the marine food web. So they are the one who keep this the connection between the different levels in the marine food web. We are taking out selectively some of these species, especially the top predators, right? So you can imagine what's going to happen to the marine food web, right? We are making big noise about this ship, but of course, ship is doing a very bad thing, but we are doing even a bad influence of the marine environment by many different ways, right? So we are destroying these marine food webs, and we can imagine what's going to happen in the future, right? So this is what I mentioned before, the fishing down the food web. You know, we started catching the top predators like the sharks, the bellfishers, and the other large fishes like a tuna and skipjack tuna, right? They are the top predators actually. Now, when they are not enough top predators, now we are going to the other levels. That's the next level. Likewise, we are destroying from the top food, the top predators to the next levels, and eventually destroying the whole ecosystem, right? So that's the situation with the fishing, right? So with all these, actually in the world, fisheries actually now in sort of a crisis situation, right? So the global fisheries is in a crisis situation with so many issues, right? So these are some of the issues we already talked, some of the things like massive overexploitation, right? Which we are catching far more than what we can, and that's ended up in a the 60 to 70, actually now it's over 90% of the world fisheries resources now overexploited. I mean, in the location wise, if you take 90% of the areas in the world, they are overexploited. But and the second one is we call the economic inefficiency, because this fishing industry is not really economically viable, right? Although there's a lot of money in this industry, but since the majority of fishing in the world is small scale, and the small scale fisheries is always running the subsidies, right? Subsidies are known as sahanadar, right? The full subsidies, and there are the tax compensations, and likewise there are a lot of subsidies for the world fisheries, and that's how it's running. Otherwise, it's not economically sustainable thing, right? For the government has to spend a lot of money to sustain these fisheries, right? So it's not economically good as well. So bad management. We call the fisheries as a common property natural resource, right? Common property, because the fishery resource is like everybody own it. whoever has a boat and a fishing gear, they can go to sea, and of course you might need a license to get, but theoretically anybody wants, you can go to sea and catch them. But so imagine if you want to get some even firewood or any other wood from a forest, you can't do it. You have to get, I mean, you can't cut trees from the forest. But it is not like for the fish, you know, anyone can catch fish, right? And the fourth one is we call the biological inefficiency. That is 30% of the fish catch is actually discarded. You have to throw it away. 30% is, you know, how much waste, how much the wastage is. I mean, even for the agriculture report is pretty much same, but especially the fish, if you lose 30%, you see, if we can at least protect some of these things, we can feed a lot of other people, right? But it's biologically inefficient because we don't use proper post-harvest technology to maintain the fish catch, and 30% is destroyed without any use. And no one can use that one. Perhaps you can use for like other fish food or something else, but it has no much economic value, right? And the fifth one is the environmental damage, like bycatch and habitat destruction. Likewise, it's going to cause a lot of problems in the environment, right? So there's a huge environment cost from fishing, right? And the sixth one is the scientific inadequacy. Oh, it's not very scientifically done, or at least we don't have very good scientific data on the marine fish catch, right? So it's scientifically inadequate in other terms, right? So you can see in any way this fishing industry is not in a good shape, right? I hope you also got some idea about these things. And even like last year I asked this question, what are the major issues with the world's fisheries? I think most of the people, they didn't really answer it properly, right? I just asked about this 6, at least 5 of these things, right? The massive exploitation, economic insecurity, bad management, the biological influence, environmental damage, and scientific, at least 5 out of 6, you could have get all the marks. But I think more than half of the health student, they couldn't score this question properly, because they're giving so many reasons, like very simple terms like habitat destruction or something like but it's only a part, you know. But I'm asking you what are the major causes, right? So we have to give these major categories, because it's a small question, and you are given 10 marks for that one. 10 or 6 marks. No, take 10 questions, 6 mark each. So most students fail to answer it properly, and they got really confused with the other things, like very simple issues as well, right? Right. So keep in mind on that one too. And so this is the situation of the world fisheries, like one of the major fisheries in the world over the last 50-60 years after the World War. Actually, this is the statistics how the world fisheries has increased. I have already given some of the statistics, and this is the total fish catch is here, right? And I'll come to this IU later. How much fish discarded, you see, this much of fish discarded, and the other different, the fish like a Peruvian anchovy. Like Peruvian anchovy is the largest contributor, like the single species wise is the largest contributor to the world fisheries. And the pelagic fish altogether, the pelagic is the fish living in the water column, and the fish living in the bottom of the ground fish, and the invertebrates. You see, and in this statistics, there is a great proportion from here. It's called IUU fishing. I don't know if you have ever heard about this term, right? It's IUU fishing. It's the illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. It's like pretty much the illegal fishing, and as well as any fishing is not being reported, as well as not regulated, right? Towards the end, actually, we will talk about these things. IUU fishing is very important for Sri Lanka as well. There is a reason for that one. I'll come to that one later on, this IUU fishing. And now the question, or the how we get to this crisis situation in the world fisheries, right? There are so many other reasons for that one, like the increasing world population. We have to increase the fish production to cope with that one, and then that's ended up in the crisis. And the other thing is, like I think last week I mentioned that in the earlier time, the scientists even, or some people believe that the fish in the world, or the world's, so the fish in the ocean they are inexhaustible, or you never can finish. There's too many or plenty of fish in the ocean, so you are not going to overexploit. But that wrong idea gave trouble as well, right? And the other issue is our emphasis on fisheries development, right? And this is also true for Sri Lanka as well, right? Our fisheries authorities always trying to develop fisheries. You know, until very recently, our fisheries department name also was like a Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture Development, right? So the whole idea, and the Ministry of Fisheries and Aquaculture Development, right? So everything targeted on developing fisheries rather than managing, right? Right, so that is one thing. And the increased fishing technology, as I mentioned. The others we already discussed, right? All these have caused a lot of issues, making the world fisheries very unsustainable, right? So now we might think that the fish are everywhere, but you see, of course, there are some fish everywhere, but things that they are very much concentrated on the coastal zone, right? Like you can see this green color. These are the coastal areas of the world, right? In some countries, they have very wide coastal areas, like in some countries, right? The coastal zone is very wide for some countries, but for Sri Lanka, it's very narrow. You can't see Sri Lanka here, but right. And there's a dark green areas. We call these areas as the upwelling areas, right? The upwelling areas. The upwelling means where the bottom waters come to the surface. These areas we call upwelling areas. And then these upwelling areas play key role in fish production, because of the upwelling, the bottom waters, the bottom nutrient rich waters come to the surface because of the mixing, and then in the surface there will be a lot of plankton growth, and eventually the plantivorous fish, and eventually you will have a huge food webs with plenty of fish, right? Like you heard about the countries like Chile and Norway. Chile කියන රට ඔයගොල්ලෝ අහලා තියෙනව නේද? මාළු ගැන එහෙම සැමන් මාළු කිව්වට අතන සැමන් නම් නෙමෙයි කියන්නේ. Can fish වල Chile රටෙන් අල්ලපු මාළු කියලා කියන්නේ. Because Chile is in actually an area where there's a lot of upwelling. Because of that upwelling, the mid-sized fish like the sardines, right, and pilchard, like the middle range fish. There are plenty of such fish. They are caught in huge amount, and that's where they can't keep it or they can't sell it, and they have to can them and then export it to other countries because there's no other way of doing it, right? So that's how we get this advertisement චිරි රටෙන් අල්ලපු ගමන් කියලා මොන පිස්සුද ඉතින් හෙට එනකොටම අවුරුදු ගාණක් ගිහලා right. So this upwelling, we might talk, we can talk a little bit on that towards the end about the like a little of fishery oceanography towards the end. And then so what I'm trying to say is that in the previous slide that the most of the fish are in this coastal zone as well as in the upwelling areas, and there's no many huge production from the open ocean actually, right? So that also true for Sri Lanka as well, right? So we have a big production from the coastal zone, but of course fishermen going to the outer sea because there is no any fish in the, I mean they don't have many fish to catch now in the coastal zone, especially because of the large small scale fishermen are very much covered in the whole area, and then for the large scale boatmen, they have no room to operate here, so they have to go for offshore areas or the international boat for fishing, right? Right. There is another video. I'll come to this one later on since we have to finish it. And then, so look at this one, like how the world's fisheries is doing today. Like some countries using a lot of fish farming cages, like here, while others using this kind of a huge net. You can see the size of this nets, and you can compare with the size of a boat and a plane. You can the size of these nets. They are huge nets actually, right? You can imagine the size of these nets. So they are just dragging all these huge nets and they are sweeping over the fish that around there, right? And use this kind of a long lines. Right. We'll talk about what is a long line. In Sinhala, it's also called it's a long line, right? It's not long line and long line. Maruel you know, it's several kilometers long. This kind of a long line, like thousands of hooks attached. They're the one all these bill fishers, like the sharks. The tuna are caught in these kinds of long lines actually, right? And even some countries using this kind of a deep sea aquaculture cages, right? Different types of, and other examples like this kind of a purse seines, right? Or light course, light course, purse seine. These are actually huge nets and they are highly efficient. So these kinds of gear are operating on the top of that. You see the advanced fishing, they have the sonar to detect where the fish are, right? Not only that, you see some of the huge fishing vessels, like they are not vessels, they are ships. These ships even have their spotter airplanes. They have their own helicopter or their small light craft to look for where the, like there's an onboard aircraft where they can spot, right? So you can imagine. අපි මේ ෆිෂරීස් කිව්වම නිකන් අපි හිතන්නේ මේ බොහොම පහත් විදිහට සරල විදිහට හරි. හැබැයි ලෝකයේ මේ ෆිෂින් කියන්නේ highly technical, highly advanced industry එකක්. So that's why a lot of people involved in this industry, right? All right. That's all the time today. I'm going to take